Well, now there we are. My old slate. This slate, it's getting on. I don't know how old it is, maybe 100 years, maybe less, I don't know. It may be more, you never really know. But nevertheless, I look at some of these YouTube things and they're all flashy and not for me. I think they must have big production teams or something. They must put a fortune into it. I'm not spending anything. And I'm just using this old slate because that's all I've got. But it fits in with the times, but still. Anyway, now I've called this the Amazing Decade. Now, the Amazing Decade, of course, were the 40s. That's a bit silly. The Amazing Decade were the 40s. Oh dear, the grammar worries me there. Anyway, let's not quibble about that. I'm talking about the 40s. Now, the 40s were really a very interesting time. And whether any other decade in Charleville history ever matched the 40s, well, I'd be very surprised if that was so. Well, we had the war. 1940, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45. Not a bad sort of historical record, if that's the case. So half the decade was made up of the war. And then there were the four big events of the 40s. Not many other decades can match it. In 45, there was the Declaration of Peace, the surrender of the Japanese. In 1947, there was the centenary of the Charleville district, based on Kennedy's travels in that part of the world in 1847. And then in, let me see, where do we move to after that? In the same year, in 1847, we had, and in the same month as the centenary celebration, we had the Great Hailstorm, which has lived long in Charleville history and in photographic memory. And then did I say 1847? In 1940, look, that's, I slip every now and then. All of these things happened in 1947, so let's get that cleared up. Okay, and then in 1948, we had the Great Fire. Now, I don't know whether there's been a fire to equal it since then. I mean, there have been many, many fires, some of them scandal-ridden, I might add. But the Great Fire of 1948, of course, was the fire of the Dalton Hotel. And it was a great fire, and as far as I'm aware, it was not scandal-ridden. Now, once again, of course, it was not put out because very few fires in Charleville have ever been put out. But anyway, one shouldn't worry too much about these things. It produced employment. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do tonight or today or whenever it may be, not that I would want to appear as if I'm a bit vague about these things, but still, I went to the Charleville Times and I had a look at what I could find quickly that dealt with each of those occasions. And I'll give you the dates of the articles that I saw, but there are more than that. And if you're really energetic, you can go to the Trove site and you can find other accounts in the Charleville Times of each of these accounts. And I'm dealing with only four. The first one, dealing with the peace declaration at the end of the war, was the Charleville Times of the Friday the 17th of August, 1945. The next one deals with the planning of the centenary celebrations, not the actual celebrations themselves, but what was planned for it. And that was the Charleville Times of the 19th September 1947. Then, let me see, what's that, just nine days? That's very strange, that cannot be. Oh, okay, yes. No, I was going to say 9 days later. It was only a little bit later after the actual centenary celebrations that we then came to the hailstorm. And the reports of the hailstorm were on Friday the 28th of November 1947. And then in the following year, on Friday the 22nd of October, there was the report of the Great Fire at the Dalton Hotel building. Okay then. Now, as I say, there are probably many reports dealing with each of these four things, probably in the Charleville Times themselves. And then there would have been reports borrowed by other newspapers of the time, but probably the Charleville Times, if you search for the article that's got the greatest number of words, you're probably likely to get the very best coverage if you can. And but I didn't bother searching too far. I simply found a fairly lengthy report on each of these that either told us what happened quickly after the event, or sometimes a week or so after the event, or in the case of the centenary celebrations, what was going to happen when November came. So the first one that I'm going to deal with is the war. Now, I remember the day the war ended very clearly. Probably everyone does. You know how they say, "Where were you when President Kennedy was killed," or something like that? Well, it's the same thing. I can remember, and I'm sure everyone can remember where they were and what they were doing when the signal went up indicating that the Second World War had ended. And it ended at 11 a.m, Charleville time that is, on the 15th of August 1945. Now, we knew that the declaration of, we'll say, peace, or the surrender, whatever it may have been, was going to come at that time on that day. And it wouldn't have been on the TV that informed us. It must have been 4VL, the local radio station, that told us that if that armistice was signed, if that unconditional surrender went ahead, it would be signalled in Charleville by the sounding of the fire brigade siren. And sure enough, I was over in a chook yard at home. Lots of chooks, poor emaciated creatures, because my father felt that chooks should forage for themselves. And then he would complain that they didn't lay, or they're not good layers. Of course, if they'd been fed, they might have done a little better than that, but anyway, that's how it was. He was back to nature, you know, in many ways. But anyway, I was over in that yard with these emaciated chooks, and I was standing, and I was only 7, of course, but very alert, I can tell you. I was standing over near a small peach tree. Peach tree was a little bigger than I was at that point, but nevertheless, the siren went up and I knew, aha, the war is over. So I raced upstairs and I told my mum and dad that the war was over, which I assume they probably knew, since they too probably heard the siren, but still. But we were expecting this because the war was very much in our minds. Even though I was only young, I'd lived all of my aware life up until that age with the war, and that's what people talked about. So, you know, from our earliest age, it was just the war. You know, there were various uncles of mine were in the war. Of course, I shouldn't say they were fighting. From what I gather, 1 or 2 of them spent most of their time in army jails for not desertion, but being away without leave. They were not well disciplined, you know, but nevertheless they were in a sense at the war. One of them, I might add, the one who probably spent most time, he had a very devoted wife, you know, and when he went under, his wife managed to persuade whoever was persuadable that he was a warrant officer. For God's sake, he was private in jail most of the time and best known to the military authorities, military police, I would have thought. But anyway, when you go down, you know, when I go down, I mean, you can pass me off as the Pope if you want. People may well believe you. So there we are. I don't know. But anyway, that's how it was. So yes, there were families involved in the war. Some people were overseas fighting. And so we used to talk about that. I had an aunt who led me astray, you know. Well, I blame her because I was only about 4. And we used to go up to the little shop not very far from where I lived. And we would say, "Hail Hitler! Hail Hitler!" Oh, my mother was quite alarmed by this, but no one seemed to be troubled and people were very forgiving. Now, I don't know how I learned Hail Hitler. I can only assume that she led me astray, and she must have led the Hail Hitlering, because how would I have known? Maybe if I'd gone to the pictures at some stage with an aunt or uncle, I would have seen newsreels But nevertheless, we knew all about Hail Hitler, I can tell you. It was also a period when I was filled with jealousy, you know. We were not a rich family. Everyone down our end of town was pretty poor. But I would go to school, and in those days, you know, even in the schoolrooms, on Fridays, people would bring a shilling or sixpence or whatever it may be, and you would buy war stamps. I remember those books of war stamps. The rich kids from the elite, they'd bring money, you know, a shilling, 2 shillings, or sixpence maybe, and for every sixpence you brought to school, you got one stamp on this card. And it was a purpley sort of stamp with an aeroplane on it, as I recall. But of course, I used to look and, you know, I'd be very envious and wish I had one of these war stamps cards. But of course, we had other things to do with our sixpences. But I did envy the elite, you know. That's why, you know, in the bilbies in those days were all red rag as well and truly. I think when you got the card filled, or when the war was over or something, you took the card to the post office and you would get back the value of the stamps that you had on the card. And of course, down the back of the school we had the air raid shelters, because somebody put it abroad. I did notice the other day, those shelters were not put in until about 1942 or 1943. A number of workers were employed for a week and a half to dig the trenches. The report I read said that they were employed for a week and a half digging trenches. Well, the only trenches I can think of were the trenches down the back of the school that we call the air raid trenches. I don't ever recall our doing any drill, but we had them anyway, just in case the Japanese took it into their heads to come and bomb Charleville, you know, during office hours, so to speak. Maybe, you know, there may have been some fear that they would come to Charleville because there was an Air Force base there, and it had some British airmen there, but it also had some American airmen there. But whether any Japanese plane was capable of flying all the way from the highlands of New Guinea or the Philippines or Indonesia or Darwin Harbour or something like that, all the way down to Charleville to bomb us. Now, I mean, if they're going to bomb, they would have bombed the airport. They'd had to be pretty damn terrible aimers if they hit the school. But we also, of course, every house had to have its air raid shelter. And so, you know, we knew the war very, very well. It was the accompaniment to our lives. And so when the declaration came that the war would end at 11 a.m. on Wednesday, the 15th of August of 45, it was really a big event. It was like putting a full stop to a tale that had been told certainly ever since I was born, and so that was the end of it. Well, okay, what happened? Well, we rushed uptown. Now, I can't remember having anything to do with my mother and father must have been uptown. But, you know, in those days, you didn't have to trail along after your parents. And, well, I just wandered. I was up and down the main, but the whole town was in the main street. And anyway, well, they must have all had a good time. And as I say, my great even memory of that very first day was all the food shops were open. And, well, eat what you like. And my mother had strange ways, you know. She used to say, when we'd go to a birthday party, I remember a friend of mine had a birthday party and we went. My mother said, now, be very careful. Don't eat too much. Don't make a pig of yourself. Otherwise, people will think you're half-starved, you know, that somehow or another we're feral children. And so, you know, be polite. Greet the hosts when you arrive, farewell your hosts when you leave, and don't make a pig of yourself when you're eating. Okay. That was a general rule, and so I applied that rule on the day that the war finished. And I was a bit shy about pushing myself forward, you know, after these years of my mother's saying, look, behave yourself, you know, and don't pig in. And we went down to there's a little cafe just near the picture show. And at that stage it was run by Peter Sams. It wasn't really a cafe, it was more like a sort of a delicatessen or something like that. But anyway, we could have whatever we wanted, and we could have probably had whatever we wanted anywhere in town. Maybe even the Bellevue Cafe, maybe in Jim Chickless's cafe too. I don't know. But we happened to light upon the cafe, or whatever one you like to call it, near the picture show. We could have whatever we wanted. The whole shop was open. Take what you want. And what did I take? I took a threepenny pig's trotter. Probably my brother got a threepenny pig's trotter too. God, if he had any sense, he would have got something better than that, and so would I. And I curse that, to this day. Why didn't I? I could have anything. And a threepenny pig's trotter to celebrate the end of the Second World War, that strikes me as being the act of a fool. And a mother who was not bringing us up properly. If she'd been bringing us up properly, she would have said, come on, tuck in, there's no need for dinner tonight. But she didn't, so there we were. Anyway, the Charleville Times tells us a little bit about that day. The Charleville Times, on 2 days later, of course, didn't have much time to gather a lot of news of everything that went on, and so it recorded only what happened on the first or second day, I think, something like that. And the Charleville Times began its report on the the report was probably written on the 16th, on the Thursday, because the paper was for sale on Friday the 17th. But it said that when the siren sounded, girl employees ran out of the shops and began playing in the streets and joining in any festivities that were going. Well, I don't think a lot of festivities were organised at the time, but people just, rushed together, and people were just filled with the excitement of the war being over. People were probably thinking, well, maybe there'll be no more rationing, because remember, we've been brought up with ration books. And if you wanted sugar, or you wanted butter, or you wanted meat, or you wanted anything, you had to have a ration coupon in order to get it. You're limited in the amounts. And certainly people who had cars were limited in the amount of petrol they could get. And so people were thinking, oh, well, the days of freedom are here. It could well be that. The report said that after the girls rushed out into the streets to join in anything that was going, and were to be found at lunchtime playing games in the street, it said that nothing much was happening in the afternoon. Now, that wouldn't be true, because I think the pubs did a pretty good trade, and as the Charleville Times happened to mention, a few people got drunk, but it added, and why wouldn't they? And so on. Of course, one aunt, I believe, now I didn't see this, but I only know it from family stories, one aunt danced on the bar of the Cattle Camp Hotel. She was a fiery piece, from what I can gather, and fairly uninhibited on that day. But anyway, she danced on the bar. I didn't see it, but we talked about it for some time, within the family, of course. And I think the town was very forgiving about that sort of thing. Okay, now that night, things got underway. That night there was a torchlight procession in Will Street. Now, where it went to, it might have gone down to the railway station, then came back. And then after that, after the torchlight procession, there was dancing in Coroni's Hall. Now, at that point, the Charleville Times report pretty well finishes. But it did say that there was a procession, probably on the following day, I'm not quite sure. But what I do know is that at night, maybe for a week afterwards, I don't know how long afterwards, but there was something on in Will Street every night. And everyone went up, and the light in the streets, because whether there was the amount of light that I recall, I'm not sure, but it's just that as the wartime, there wasn't much light about, no street lights, the houses were all in darkness because we had the blinds pulled down, blackout blinds as they're called, and we had the coloured bulb lights, all the way down Will Street, and really it was, how you can walk into one of these dull churches somewhere, unneglected, and they're not very exciting. But if you go to Moscow and you go into the Russian Orthodox churches, it's like, going to heaven. It's so colourful and beautiful and wonderful. And going to Will Street and Charleville in those nights after the end of the war was a little bit like that. And, the coloured lights were there, and there was something on each night. There was they had one of, they did all sorts of things, and, I don't think anyone worried about the laws of the time. I don't know what they said or didn't say. But I can remember there was a board, with sort of jockeys and horses, and you cranked a handle and randomly the horses moved ahead, and you could bet on a particular coloured horse. I know that was one of the things that went on in the street. But one of the great events was they dug a dirty big hole, in what they called the gardens. They weren't really gardens at all. They were parched pieces of dirt surrounded by cement, because the council was not of great quality in those days, I can tell you. But they dug a dirty big hole, and the symbolism escapes me, but for some reason or another, they had the bearing of the lantern, the hurricane lanterns. And they dug the big hole, and then they tossed in all of these kerosene lanterns, and that symbolised something. I'm not quite sure. Well, I leave it to you. You work out what that meant, but it puzzled me at the time, and it puzzled me a little bit. I mean, if I stretch my imagination, I can suggest what they may have meant, but, it's a bit hard, I can tell you. Now, I did make a list, though, of the procession. There was a procession, and the procession, what day? That must have been on the, at 1 p.m. on the Thursday procession. Now, people may have been thinking about this procession for a few days beforehand. Okay, it was a grand procession. It started at 1 p.m. and it ended up at what we call the football ground, which the Charleville Times very primly called King Edward Park. But anyway, the procession was quite a long one. It was led, first of all, by the town band, playing patriotic tunes, I suppose. Then came the returned soldiers marching. Then RAAF people. I just would have thought the soldiers and RAAF were much the same, but they make a distinction between the two. There was something then called the VDC, I don't know what that was. Then after them came the Red Cross. After them came the ambulance. Then after them came something called the ACF. Then the CWA. Oh, you couldn't leave the CWA because they were fairly formidable ladies, and they wouldn't be relegated to the back of the queue, you may be sure of that. Then came the members of the hospital board. After that, sort of miscellaneous items. First of all, there were ladies in fancy rig. Now, I think that might have meant ladies on horseback. Maybe they were done up as, warriors or something, I don't know. But anyway, ladies in fancy rig. After them came children on decorated bikes. Now, decorated bikes mean that you got crepe paper of various colours and you threaded it through the wheels of your bikes, probably some on the handlebars, but they were decorated bikes. And it was very exciting, and we thought it was very grand. Okay, then. After that, according to the Charleville Times, came the kiddies with decorated goat carts. Now, I know my brother had a goat cart. Whether he was in the decorated goat carts or whether he was in undecorated goat carts later in the procession, I'm not sure. Or maybe he just rode his goat. I'm not quite sure about that. I know he was in it with his goat, and whether he had a cart or not, I don't know. But the goat was called Trigger. Oh, roundish, a quality goat, I can tell you. Okay, then. Then, after that, there came the floats. That is, people did things and set up things on the back of trucks. The first one, of course, was the fire brigade. After that came a convent float in which the girls of the convent depicted peace. And I think that was quite good. Then, after that, the third one came an effigy of Tojo being hanged from a gallows. Tojo was Hirohito was the emperor, and Tojo must have been the wartime general or something like that. Then the croquet club ladies were not to be left out. Then after that there came a variety of decorated cars and lorries. Now I think I may have been in that, because there was a fellow called, what's his name, Sid Rankin, and he had a sedan car. And I know I read in that, it could have been in the centenary procession, I'm not quite sure. No, it must have been that one, because this procession went to the football field, and that's where I went. And you got in the car, and then it was decorated around us, because Sid Rankin's idea of decorating the house was to tie those palm branches. You know that those palms grow very tall in Charleville. They've got these great spikes like, swordfish's snout or, a crosscut saw along those. And so we got in the car, and then these things were tied around the outside of the car, and off we went in the procession to the football field. Okay. Then came a float called the Mighty Atom. Now, I don't know whether that referred to the atom bomb, or maybe there was some newspaper character of those years called the Mighty Atom. But anyway, that was the next float. The next float was St. Mary's Tennis Club. Well, I can tell you what, the Catholics were right into it. The convent kids put in the float for peace, and here we are. We've got St. Mary's Tennis Club forward in among the floats. Might I add that the Charleville State School did nothing at all. I've told you about old Bolly Kirk. He must have been a lazy old bastard, in addition to swishing his cane and carrying on. But the school did nothing. Oh dear, I feel embarrassed even now to think about it. Then came another strange one. I don't know what to make of this one. This float was a black woman posing as a champion show rider. Well, I don't know. The next one was Now We Can Have Petrol. And the next one was an equally strange one. The Country Queen in her gunya. Well, I have no recollection of that at all. Then came Britannia. Then came something called HMAS Colombo. Now, I checked last night about HMAS Colombo. I don't think there was ever such a ship, so I don't know what it meant. It beat me. Then came the Gentlemen, the Bowls Club. Then came undecorated cars and trucks. Well, I certainly wasn't in the midst of that because I was in Sid Rankin. Now, how I ended up in Sid Rankin's car, I really do not know. What was I doing in Sid Rankin's car? Maybe, I don't know. Maybe he was sweet on one of my aunts or something like that. I don't really know. But anyway, and then at the end of the parade came several decorated goat carts. Now, I don't think my brother was at the end of the parade, but anyway, it was a grand affair. And the Charleville Times said that, yes, one of the great features of the procession was the fact of the bright lights, and it called them the electric light effects in Will Street, giving a festive appearance. Well, I can remember they had bulbs, not those tiny little things you see now on Christmas trees. These were bigger bulbs, like radio valves. And they were painted different colours, red, green, blue, yellow, whatever. And they decorated the streets from Alfred Street down to Galatea Street and Will Street. And so there were celebrations in the street each night. And there was also a dance out at the aerodrome. You see, when the Americans were there, they put up buildings quickly. And apparently a simple form of building at that point was the igloo hut. Quite a big hut, quite big. Oh, it must have been quite big. And they had these domed roofs. I take it they were very simple, easily constructed or something like that. There were a number of them, I think. Well, certainly I'm sure there were several of them in the hospital grounds. When you enter the hospital grounds on your left, last time I looked there, just a lot of box trees in there, but there were quite a lot of igloo huts in there. Well, when I say quite a lot of number, maybe 2, maybe 3, I'm not quite sure. After the war, they became places of assignation, so I believe, but I wouldn't repeat any of that. Okay. The American airmen, they had tents down behind the hospital, going down towards that railway crossing. And I did have one family, Lower King Street. The old mother, used to take in the washing from the airmen. But the daughter used to deliver it. I say no more. Okay then. I'll give you no names, but all this happened down in Lower King Street. Okay, so there we are. Okay then. What else? Oh, yes, there was a dance in one of these, quite a number of these igloo huts out at the airport, because of the because of the airmen who were based there, American and British. And there was a dance there on one of the nights after the war. I don't think any of our relatives attended, but they did go out the following day. Why, I'm not quite sure. Maybe they believed that there were valuables to be found among the rubbish or something, I don't know. Anyway, they went out, they found 10 bob, and that was something, so it was worth their going and so on, but so there we are. And then, so I suppose eventually we went back to school. We got an extra week's holiday, of course, I might add. The holidays at that time were 3 weeks, and 2 weeks rather. And I think the war ended in the first week, and we then had 3 weeks holiday. So we weren't complaining. We thought it was quite good. But life didn't get back to normal for a long, long time. I don't know when the rationing ended and so on, and then eventually the soldiers returned and so on. But it was a very exciting time. Okay, so there we are. Now I'll leave that one aside. Then we move on to centenary celebrations. Now in September they were organising for the centenary celebrations. Now these were to go on over 5 days, and they were to begin on Saturday the 1st of November. This is in 1947. And 5 days of celebrations. One of them was a public holiday, and they organised a public holiday for Monday. That would be 1, 2, 3. That would be Monday the 3rd. And then somehow or another they organised half holidays for the 4th and the 5th. That's the Tuesday and the Wednesday. But very early in the piece they were getting ready for the great procession. And the procession was planned to gather at 9:30 at the corner of Alfred and Wells Street, and then it was to depart at 10:30. It was going to go down Alfred Street, Wills Street, up Parry Street, Walter Street, into King Street, and then into the showgrounds. Okay, then. Mr. Stevenson, of course, I think these were worthies who were put in charge of pieces. Mr. Stevenson was put in charge of the historical floats. Someone called Bob Roberts. Mr. Stevenson was a solicitor in town. Bob Roberts I really did not know. He was in charge of transport. Jim Espy, one of the Red Raggers, was in charge of industry. Arthur Proud, a more notorious Red Ragger, I might add, but very friendly with our family, of course, the Espys. We were of a feather, so to speak. He was in charge of societies. Okay, someone called Mr. Mudge and Mr. Layton. These are names I do not know. They were in charge of sporting. And Tom Butler, of the Butler family, Butlers, Charleville, Orgathilla and so on, in charge of humorous. Private vehicles, private decorated vehicles, were in the charge of Bill Connolly. Bill would have been Toddy Connolly's brother. Okay. Children, Jack Walsh of the school. He who did something from the balcony of Hull's Hotel. I say no more. Okay then. And he was helped by someone called Mr. Hanlon. I can remember that name very vaguely, but no more than that. And miscellaneous C. Attridge. Well, okay then. Off we went. What happened on the first day? The first day was an air pageant. Oh, and I read a report of, 100 planes coming in. I don't know, there must have been small planes. I don't know whether there was any big planes there. But it was to be great events. They called the procession, there was a monster procession. And I think everything that week was monster. And so this was a monster air pageant on the day of the Saturday, the 1st of November. That evening, I think over on the island, but I wouldn't be sure about that, the Boy Scouts put on a demonstration of camp cooking. And after that, there was a camp concert, probably with community singing, I would have thought. On the Sunday, during the day, there was a monster sports carnival. Well, that would have been good. I would have been there, It was down at the football field. And I can remember a little bit of it. Although we had a number of sports days in the 40s, as I can recall. I used to be able to run a bit, I was sort of a sprinter. And I probably took part in some of those races, hoping to win something. Whether I did or not, I can't really remember, and even if I did, I'd only got sixpence. You know, you don't remember sixpence. I remember an uncle gave me 2 bob once, and I thought that I was like a millionaire. So, but sixpence you tend to forget. But the great event of those sports days, and particularly of this sports day, was the Old Buffers race. Well, you know, the Old Buffers were well known in town. There were certain Old Buffers who would have been expected to go in that race. But they, you know, had long pants, but they rolled their pants up about their ankle, and then away they went. Well, you know, these are all old blokes, 50, 60, and where they went. This was one of the highlights of the day. Everyone thought it was very funny, but also very brave of them. And so that was during the day. That night they had a monster swimming carnival. Now, the swimming pool in those days was down behind where Elders is now. If you would go right down as far as you can go towards the river without falling into that billabong or whatever that you might call it there, that's where the swimming pool was. In a 25-metre pool surrounded by a lot of galvanised iron. Okay then. So that was Sunday. Then Monday, of course, was the big holiday and the grand procession. Oh dear, what a wonderful day that was. And then on Monday and Tuesday, on Tuesday and Wednesday there were half holidays, and in the mornings they had clay pigeon shoot out at the race course, I think, and 2 days of racing where the prize money I see from one of the advertisements was £421. And the main race of the main day, I don't know whether that was the Tuesday or the Wednesday, was an £8 bracelet donated by Currani's Hotel. Admission, 10 shillings. Can you imagine? 10 shillings to get into the races. Gee. No, they were being touched. I wouldn't have paid 10 shillings. There's always a way in, you know. You can get in all of these races, football field, race course, showgrounds. You can get in over the fence somewhere, as most kids did in those. The ladies, of course, gentlemen paid 10 shillings. So that's like £100 these days. The ladies got in for 2 bob. Now, just one moment. I've got something to show you. Now have a look up here. No, not there. I'll go down here a bit. Okay then, now here's the town band, led by Constable Dangerfield or something. Here we are, the Cobb and Co coach, the Bush Brothers of 1901. I don't know, that fellow's been thrown off a horse or something. Now when I turn back this way, because there's a family connection here. Oh, how do I find it? Now I'll go about it this way. Now if you look here, now these are the girls from the convent, symbolising peace. And if you look up here, somewhere there, 2 of those girls are my cousins. One was Nora and one was Mary Rose. These are my Uncle Tom's children. But how's that, you know? This was one of the leading floats of the procession, and the Bilbys are almost leading it. Very wonderful. Now have a look down here. These are the nurses. Okay then. They were the Red Cross girls. Okay, and what's this one down here? What'll I have a look? Oh, well, there we are. Now this is an interesting one that I think most people have forgotten about. There's a map of Australia filled in with fruit, and it says it was the COD procession. Now that wasn't part of the planning. COD, that was interesting because there was a shop, there's a shop in Charleville now. Well, it's a shop, I suppose you'd call it, but it's had many purposes over the years. It began when I first went to school as being empty. But then someone decided the Committee of Direction of Fruit Marketing was established by the government, I suppose, to bring fruit and vegetables to the people of the West. And they set up what was known as the COD, Committee of Direction of Fruit Marketing, and they brought fruit to Charleville. Oh, we thought it was very wonderful. And so that was in 1945. I thought it was a little bit later than that, but no, they were there. Oh, wait a moment. This is not 45. This is 1947. So that COD, it probably began there around about 1947. It wasn't there when I first started school. It became a bit after that, I think. After that closed down, it became a sort of like Commonwealth Employment Service. Don't know what happened after that, but now, we've all got social consciences. It's now sort of an office for people on parole. And so if you're in Charleville and you're on parole, I think you've got to report every now and then. But it's very considered because it has wheelchair or disabled access. So I don't know how many disabled people are in wheelchair or, needing that. But anyway, Charleville's a very thoughtful place. Anyway, I offered this newspaper. This is the Charleville Times, you can see. Charleville Times, dated the 21st of November. This paper, I keep it in a box here. I tried to give it to the State Library once, But they said, oh, well, look, thank you very much, but we already have one. But I treated it very carefully because the paper was some special sort of paper. Looked pretty good at the time, but now it falls apart. It's very brittle. It's like fine porcelain or something. And so, well, I just put this over here. I don't want to break it. I dare not open it, because it just falls apart. But a great pity. But, oh dear, wait a minute. Now look, you see here's a bit of it here. If I can, see, look at it. Look at that. That's what happens to it if you open it. It's a great pity. I've got to be careful. But here's an interesting thing. Now I keep this. Oh, if I do it like that or like that, I don't want to get it to it. Anyway, this says the Charleville 100 Years Centenary, 1947. Now this is one of the original booklets from the centenary celebrations, because my Uncle Tom had a fair bit to do with it. He wrote a section here on the Aborigines. He's not mentioned on the front page there, but I don't know whether you can see who they were, I think. Okay then. But I wondered where I got this from, and then when I went through it a few months ago, I found, there we are, that's that page. So I now know where it came from. The newspaper obviously came from Uncle Tom, because he has written on it that Mary Rose and Nora are in the top row of the convent float. And this one says, to all at Dundoo. Now, Dundoo was where my Uncle Tom's sister, my grandfather's sister, lived. And it says from Tom, Lily, and the children. Well, Tom, Uncle Tom, Bilby, and Lily, his wife, and the children, Nora, Ian, or Nora, Mary Rose, and Ian. So, but this has got a sort of coloured cover. They put extra copies of that out, in many years later, or subsequently they had a reprint. But it was just a plain cream cover. But this one, that must have been the original cover. And so I keep it all wrapped up because I fear that it will fade. So there we are. Okay then, so where are we up to? We've dealt with the centenary celebration. Now after that, it's all right, it won't fade too much. Then we come to the hailstorm. I always remember that hailstorm, and I remember, they talk about the sacrifices of mothers, or the bravery of mothers, and I really think my mother deserved a George Medal, for what she did on that occasion. It was a Sunday, and we went down the bush on that day. So what else did you do in 1947? There wasn't much to do. There was no TV, radio wasn't worth listening to. There were no books, there were no toys in the home, nothing. So we used to head down to the gully and environs. And on this occasion, it was a Sunday, we were down the gully and probably we may have gone crayfishing or something. And we could see this very fierce-looking storm coming, but it didn't really mean very much to us. We were accustomed to dust storms because in the 40s there were dust storms all the time, and you'd see, if you were lucky, you'd see the dust storm. It was just over the trees, a great black cloud. And if you were unlucky, it was upon you before you knew it. You'd call, dust storm coming, dust storm. Everyone had closed their doors and windows. Made no difference. You were nearly choked by the damn thing. But anyway, on this occasion, it was a hailstorm, but we didn't know anything about hail. Maybe I was with my brother and my sister, maybe my cousin too, I'm not quite sure. It was suggested by one of them that perhaps we should go home. But I was, smarty-arsey, and I said, no. Look, why should we go home? Oh my God, I'm going. I think I'm going. Anyway, no, I said, just because there's a storm coming. The Aborigines lived in the midst of all of this. They wouldn't have been frightened of storms like this. Let's make a cubby house and we'll see the storm out. Well, we were about to do that when our mother appeared on the banks of the gully and hurried us home with all speed. Now, she didn't know where we were. She just knew that somehow or another we were probably out that way somewhere. We could have been down beyond the sewage treatment works. We could have been in the cemetery. We could have been over with in the pensioners' huts area somewhere. I don't really know. But she didn't know. But she was brave enough, despite what she could see coming, to come out to try to find us. She hurried us home, and I can tell you what, as we walked up the steps, down came the hail. Oh, my God, I tell you. The hail didn't come down in little pea-sized bits of ice. The hail came down in the size of bricks. The thunder was just terrible. If someone stood beside you, they have to shout, even inches from your ear, and you could either not hear them or barely hear them. The sound was absolutely terrible. And this went on for about half an hour, apparently. The Charleville Times had quite a long account of the effects of the hailstorm. Oh, it was vicious. It really was absolutely vicious. If we'd been caught out in that storm, we would certainly have been killed. Nothing much would have survived. Not a leaf was left on tree anywhere in town, and those trees all along the gully were scarred for years afterwards from the ice hitting them and scarring their bark. And the Hulse Hotel, for instance, it had those sort of wooden slat blinds, green they were, but by the time the hailstorm had finished with them, you could see the wire strips there and bits of timber from the blinds just hanging out. The Catholic Church was wrecked from one end of the roof, one end of the other. What the Charleville Times described as valuable, priceless glass. Well, I don't know that it was priceless. They also suggested it was irreplaceable. Well, I don't think so. I think it was sort of coloured glass. But in any case, whether it was or not, it all burnt down a few years later, of course. The Coronis, went through the roof of the Coronis Hall. Coronis Hotel was flooded, the rooms were flooded. There was a lot of flooding along there, just in the banking up of the ice. The ice was banked up, they said, 4 feet, 5 feet deep in some places, up against the fences, probably in the direction that the storm was coming. The storm seemed to locate itself directly over the town. Not outside the town, not beyond the town. I don't even know whether it was south of the town. But certainly it was like an act of God, I do believe. Punishment, perhaps, for the wicked lives. Maybe of Lower King Street, you never really know. Maybe we could have caused the ire of God, perhaps. I don't know. But whatever it was, everyone was punished. And it was a pretty terrible affair. I can't remember any damage being done to the state school. But it must have been done. But we went to school and I can't remember any problem there. We had some windows broken. My father decided that he would fix them 10 years later, or thereabouts, maybe 5 years later. He just got a couple of sheets of galvanised iron, propped them up against the window with a bit of, piping. And there they stayed. Well, not 10 years, but maybe 5 years. My father was not a man of quick action, that's for sure. Okay. But everyone else in town, my God, a man who had about 1,000 chooks, lost half of them. There were dead dogs, there were dead birds. Oh, it was a terrible affair. Anyone who was around at that time, they would certainly remember it. Now, the damage to the town was not the same as the damage to the town of the 1991 flood. Every single person was devastated by that flood. And so, even though, the hailstorm goes down in Charleville's history, and there were plenty of photos around town of the hail in the street and the denuded trees. Now, remember, this is November, and all the cedar trees in town would have been in full leaf, but not a leaf left on any of them. The Charleville Times report, which one was that one? That was of 28th of November. It gave a picture, and it painted a picture of this beautiful English village, the Queen City of the West, it said. Of course, we used to call ourselves the Queen City of the West, and damn Roma what they may have called themselves. We were the Queen City of the West, and I said the Queen City of the West had ornamental trees in the streets. It had gardens all down the middle of the main street. There were long Ionic columns that were also sort of, light posts and so on, which may or may not work. There were houses of the most modern architecture, churches of the most modern architecture and style. Oh, it sounded, said wonderful. Of course, it was poetry, I can tell you, since those gardens in the 1940s that went all the way down Wall Street, not a blade of grass. It was just bare, compacted earth. The council must have been a bloody awful council in those years. They had little sprinklers in them, but they were absolutely denuded. But the writer in the Sunday Mail, or not the Sunday Mail, in the Charleville Times, said these gardens were so lovely. But at the end, this picturesque little English village was absolutely ruined. And so there we are. Anyway, the town got itself back together eventually. I did notice that some months later, Butler Air Transport, that had a service going down to Sydney, used to bring back great quantities of roofing nails and so on. But anyway, eventually the town got back to normal with it, but it was a pretty terrible affair. And the thing I remember most of all about it was the fact that my mother came in search of us, and she really didn't know where we were. Now, when I get this down on the floor, and because I've got a piece of paper over here, well, I had a piece of paper. I don't know what happened to it. Oh, here we are. No, that's not it. Just one moment. Oh, it doesn't really matter what I was searching for. You see, that's the problem. I've got no production crew here. I am the production crew. Someone said to me, "Do you do any editing?" Editing? I know nothing about editing. What you see is what you get. There's no editing done here, I can tell you. Anyway, the fourth thing, of course, was the fire at the of the Dalton Hotel. I tried to find what pictures were on that night. But for some reason or other, the Tates missed out a couple of weeks of telling us what was on the pictures. So we don't know what picture is on. But I have the picture in mind, all of the people sitting there in that wonderful theatre, and they'd hear the siren. Well, no one in Charleville would have sat around in the pictures, no matter what was on. It could have been Gone with the Wind. But with the siren in Charleville, you headed off to wherever the fire may be. It's a wonder people weren't killed, getting out of there in this stampede. Anyway, it was on a Tuesday night. Some people say the siren went at 9:30. Some people say that the siren went at 9:45, but no matter. The whole town went, because in Charleville, you went to the fire. Well, up we went to the fire, and I think I told you in one of my great productions that I went in a pair of pyjamas that had no belt in them, and I had to hold my pyjama pants up all the damn time. We got really close. I got there near the outside Espy's, and the Espy's glass was really hot, and the glass in the front of it was all cracked. But we weren't edging away from it, I can tell you. I probably went home a little baked, but so too a lot of other people. But the fire started, they said, about the middle of the hotel. Two-storied place. It was quite a big hotel because there was a little gap, not very big, between the Bank of New South Wales and the beginning of the Dalton Hotel. Then the whole Dalton Hotel went all the way down to the corner opposite the post office, then round the corner down about as far as the Telegraph Hotel, I think. Okay then. But it began burning, and burned very quickly. I don't know when it was actually built. The Charleville Times said they thought it was built about 50 years before. That would have been in the early 1890s. If I search far enough, I can find it, I'm sure. It did begin, I know, at one stage it was called the Royal, but by the time the Daltons took over, it then became the Dalton Hotel. I crept in one day, and I found that the main entrance in Will Street and you walked in, and there's this great staircase, grand escalier. You'd think you're in the Paris Opera House. You'd think you're in the Vienna Opera House. And at the bottom of the grand steps, there was a portrait of Miss Lucinda Dalton. That was probably in her maiden day. I think Miss Lucinda Dalton, in about 1918, she married a fellow from Wallal, and she became, I think, Mrs. Bryant, but I'm not quite sure about that. The name, I did know it a few weeks ago, but I've forgotten it. But I can't remember what Miss Lucinda Dalton's married name may have been. But anyway, she was best known always as Lucy Dalton. Her father was Pierce Dalton, and he was certainly there in 1867, so they were one of the very oldest families in town. The report of the fire was quite interesting. It said, as a matter of pride, that the fire brigade reported that there was a very good pressure of water. Well, they tended to report on the successes of the fire brigade in town. Not that the fire brigade in those days ever actually put very much out. They began their fire service maybe it must have been in the late 90s, in the 90s maybe, but they didn't start very well. Maybe they began and they didn't have hoses. Then when there was a fire and they found they had hoses, well, they didn't have the nozzles for directing it. Then on one occasion they had the hoses, they were not long enough. Or another occasion they had the hoses, they were long enough, they had nozzles, but they couldn't find the water connections. It wasn't spectacularly successful to start with, but never mind. Nor was it spectacularly successful on this occasion, because the whole thing burned so quickly that you couldn't put it down. Fortunately, it didn't burn any of the shops over the road, and the shops over the road that the Charleville Times mentioned were Espy's, of course, where I was outside, and a couple of other places, Sydney Bargain Drapers. Although, as I remember them, they were around in Alfred Street, but they must have moved at some stage. And who else? There was also a place called The Hub. Must have been a men's store, I think, but I can't remember where that was. But they were wooden buildings over the road adjoining the Charleville Hotel, and behind which was that notorious billiard room. A few shops in the Dalton Hotel were mentioned. Now, the pub was, of course, down there near the post office, swinging doors as they had in the Wild West movies in America, swinging doors, opening out onto both Alfred Street and Will Street. And there was one shop they didn't mention, was that very first shop, straight after the Bank of New South Wales, a saddler's shop. I never went into it, but you could smell the leather. Oh, it was very lovely. Then Mr. Gore, the hairdresser, was, I think, a bit after that. And I think round the corner in Alfred Street, let me see. It said Hubert Marshall, the bootmaker. Now, maybe he was in Alfred Street, I'm not sure. We used to go to Hubert Marshall, the bootmaker, but I thought he was down there behind A1 Rubber Agency. But nevertheless, he might have moved up market a bit. But then there was another one there. A. Sims, second-hand, second-hand, I don't know what you call it, seller or something, I don't really know. Anyway, it was a second-hand shop. And I tried to think some time ago, there was in Alfred Street there was Cook and O'Malley's, then there was Fraser's, and then I thought it was a place belonging to Bells and Hobbles, but that really was Jim Lang's plumber's shop. And then I saw this name, A. Sims Second-Hand Seller, or whatever. Had a shop there in the Dalton building when it was on fire. And I'm pretty sure it must have been Mr. Sims, who was Bells and Hobbles. But anyway, the fire came, the entire building burnt down. It was still probably smouldering on the following day. But we didn't waste any time. We went up there looking for valuables. We'd go down after school, or maybe we might even go to run down at lunchtime or something. But we never found any valuables there, unfortunately. But, there should have been some money there. A few pennies or something like that. But we did never find any. But, it was one of the great fires of Charleville, I can tell you. Now, since then, we've had, most recently there's been the Telegraph Hotel. And, no, what do they call it? The Rocks Hotel. There was the Telegraph Hotel. the railway station, there was the Catholic Church, there was the State... Oh, no. The State School fire was in 1957. Far, far grander than the Dalton. You may have thought the Dalton Hotel was the fire to end all. Not a bit of it. When the Fancy Dress Ball... it was after the Fancy Dress Ball. When the State School burned down, whoosh! What a fire, I can tell you. Probably there's never been a fire like that. But anyway, there we are. They were the 4 great events, or maybe the 5 great events of the 1940s. Okay, you can say 1991 there was the flood. There was the school fire and so on, but the 1940s had it all. We had the war, the end of the war. We had the centenary celebrations. We had the... we had the hailstorm. So the war ending, the centenary celebrations, the hailstorm, and then in 1948 we had the burning of the Dalton. Now no decade can beat that one, I tell you, and I lived through it all.